Spotify is more than an app. It's the world's biggest jukebox. Hundreds of millions of people use it every day to soundtrack their commute, their workouts, their lives. And if you're paying $11.99 a month, it feels like you're doing the right thing. Supporting music legally, supporting artists, being part of a system that should be overflowing with cash. But then you hear the part nobody wants to explain. An artist can rack up millions of streams, real fans, real listeners, real traction, and still end up with a payout that looks like pocket change. So where does your money actually go? And why does the biggest music platform on earth still leave so many talented musicians feeling broke? In today's video, we're breaking down Spotify's money machine dollar by dollar, stream by stream. You'll see exactly how Spotify really pays artists, why the per-stream number is actually misleading, and why your subscription doesn't support your favorite artists in the way you think it does. This is the Finance Files of Spotify. Before we follow the money, we need to understand what Spotify actually sells. Spotify operates on a simple model. Most of Spotify's revenue comes from premium subscribers who pay monthly, with a smaller portion generated through ads served to free-tier listeners. In 2024, Spotify generated roughly 15.7 billion euros in revenue. That's about $17 billion US, with around 88% from subscriptions and the rest coming from ads played to free users. On paper, that looks incredible. But here's what most people don't realize. For over a decade, Spotify lost money every year. Despite pulling in billions, the company consistently struggled to turn that scale into reliable profit. It wasn't until 2024 that Spotify posted its first full year of operating profit, around $1.5 billion. So what kept Spotify in the red for so long? Two things. First, licensing costs. Spotify has to pay the majority of its music revenue to the people who own the music, and those payments are massive. Second, running Spotify at this scale is expensive. When you're serving hundreds of millions of listeners across dozens of countries, you're paying for global infrastructure, servers, bandwidth, security, and the engineering teams that keep the app fast and reliable. Then you add discovery tech, recommendations, playlists, search, and fraud detection, and the cost stacks up fast. For years, the math simply didn't work. Spotify was paying out huge sums, spending heavily to grow, and only recently flipped into profitability through price increases, cost-cutting, and operating discipline. Here's the disconnect. Spotify is now profitable, but artists still feel underpaid. So the real issue isn't Spotify's margin. It's what happens after the payout, once money enters the royalty pipeline. So how does Spotify actually distribute money? Most people think it works like this. You stream a song, Spotify sends the artist a fixed amount, maybe a cent per play. Simple, intuitive, and completely wrong. Instead, Spotify uses something called a royalty pool. And the way it works is the reason why a handful of artists get rich, while most get almost, nothing. Each month, Spotify takes in money from premium subscriptions and ads. The majority of that money, around 70%, goes into a royalty pool. That pool is what gets divided up and paid out to music. What's left covers Spotify's costs, servers, staff, marketing, and whatever remains after that becomes profit. In 2024, Spotify paid out roughly $10 billion to the music industry through that royalty pool. Now, here's the key part. Like I said earlier, Spotify doesn't pay per stream. Instead, it calculates what percentage of all Spotify streams your song represents that month, and then pays out that same percentage of the pool. Let's say an artist gets 10 million streams in a month, and let's say Spotify had 100 billion total streams that same month across the entire platform. That artist's streams make up 0.01% of all Spotify streams, which may sound like a little, but in context actually is a lot. So that artist gets 0.01% of the royalty pool for that month. If the pool that month was, say, $1 billion, that artist's share would be $100,000. But here's the catch. That $100,000 doesn't go straight to the artist. It goes to the rights holders. Rights holders are record labels, music publishers, distributors, the people who own the music. And the artist only gets paid after those rights holders take their cut. Depending on the contract, that can mean the artist walks away with a tiny fraction of what Spotify actually paid out. So in this example, Spotify paid out $100,000 for 10 million streams. but the artist might only see $15,000 of that, or less, depending on their deal. That's why the per-stream number you see online is misleading. It's not that Spotify pays a fixed rate per play, it's that your share of the pool depends on your share of total streams, and then gets carved up by whoever owns the rights before it reaches the artist. Now we just walked through the math. Those percentages and splits aren't the same for everyone. And how much an artist actually keeps depends almost entirely on the contracts they signed. If you're signed to a major label, like many professional artists are, the label typically owns your master recordings. This gives the label permission to get their hands on the Spotify payout first. It is then split, according to contracts, that were often written before streaming dominated the industry. The label might take 70 to 80% off the top. Then your manager takes a percentage. Your producer takes a cut. Collaborators and co-writers take their splits. By the time the money filters down to the actual artist, they're often left with 15 to 20% of what Spotify originally paid out, sometimes even less. At this point, you can already see the shape of the problem. The royalty pool rewards scale, the pipeline rewards ownership, and the artist is usually last in line. So let's pinpoint the pressure points where artists say the system hits hardest. First, in 2024, Spotify introduced a rule. Tracks need at least 1,000 streams in the last 12 months to qualify for any payout at all. Below that, zero. Spotify says this fights fraud and focuses payments on real artists. However, critics argue it hits the smallest artists first, people still building momentum, while quietly pushing even more money toward the top. Second, labels sit closest to the money. The major labels control a huge chunk of the music people actually stream, and they negotiated strong terms early. Guaranteed minimums, upfront payments, and preferential deals. But artists often don't see those benefits because many older record deals were built for physical sales, high margins on CDs, label control over distribution, and contract terms that leaned heavily in the label's favor. Streaming flipped the economics, but plenty of artists are still getting paid under rules written for a different era. And without leverage, renegotiating is close to impossible. Third, discovery. On Spotify, playlists don't just boost a song. They can decide whether it even gets heard at all. Getting onto an editorial playlist can change your career overnight. Miss that placement, and your track can vanish into the algorithm, buried under millions of others. And discovery is everything. If people can't find you, you can't rack up streams. And if you can't rack up streams, you can't grow your share of the royalty pool. And fourth, the royalty pool effect. Because payouts are based on total stream share, a massive global hit doesn't just earn more. It changes the distribution for everyone else. So even if you never listen to the top 40, your subscription can still flow disproportionately toward the songs dominating total streams. Your indie folk singer, your local jazz band, your bedroom producer, they can lose payout share to global superstars even though you're paying to listen to their music. It's a winner-takes-all system, wearing a fair-sounding label. And that's why the Taylor Swift moment mattered. In 2014, Taylor Swift pulled her entire catalog from Spotify around the release of 1989. Not just the new album, but everything. Her argument was simple. Spotify's free tier allowed millions of people to stream music without paying a cent, funded only by ads. She felt that the model devalued music, treating it like something that should be systematically consumed for free, instead of art that deserves to be paid for. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed that year, she wrote, "Music is art, and art is important and rare. Important, rare things are valuable. Valuable things should be paid for." Her stance was that if artists let their music be available for free, it would undermine their ability to set prices and control how their work gets distributed. And she refused to make her life's work part of an experiment she didn't think fairly compensated creators. Then in 2015, when Apple Music launched, she publicly criticized Apple for not paying artists during free trials. And Apple reversed course within 24 hours, which showed just how much influence the biggest artists can have when they choose to use it. In 2017, she returned to Spotify after proving she had options: iTunes sales, physical sales, touring power, and bargaining power. Unfortunately, most artists don't have that. They can't pull their catalog and survive. They can't pressure platforms publicly and win. And they can't negotiate better terms when walking away would mean disappearing from where the listeners are. And here's the uncomfortable truth: Spotify has very little incentive to change a system that keeps labels happy, keeps listeners paying, and keeps shareholders rich. So what does this mean for you and the artists you actually care about? First, streaming is influence, not direct support. Your listening can help an artist break through. More streams can trigger playlists and recommendations, but it doesn't work like tipping them $1 every time you press play. Second, if you want to support artists directly, the best tools are still the old ones. Merch, live shows, direct purchases, and platforms where artists keep more of the sales. Third, nothing changes unless listeners, artists, and regulators push for it. There's no built-in incentive for Spotify to redesign a system that already works for the biggest rights holders and keeps the catalog intact. To be fair to Spotify, it didn't invent this mess, and streaming did help pull the industry out of the piracy era. But the way the money moves today means a lot of artists still feel like they're running on a treadmill. Now that you know how Spotify pays artists, you can decide for yourself whether your subscription is supporting the music you love or just reinforcing a system where the biggest names get bigger and everyone else fights over the leftovers.